G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and a fantastic week so far. So today we're going to talk about a fair bit. Of course, at the end of this video, we're going to have a look at the maps, and Russia has made some claims and some ground confirmed on the maps over the last 48 hours since we've actually had a look at it, with the village of Tabayevka coming into the fold of, is it occupied? Is Ukraine still there? Well, we're going to look at the claims both ways, as well as different movements that we haven't seen for a while on some different front lines. Of course, we're going to then have a look at what's going on with the commander-in-chief in the Ukrainian forces. We're going to have a look at the NATO secretary in the US, and actually, we're going to have a look at some footage as well here. So this will probably be demonetized. But then we're also going to talk about strikes within Russia with Western weapons. But where we're going to start is, we've spoken before about the many rumors over the past 3 or 4 months that there's been a lot of tension between Ukraine's President Zelensky, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, General Valery Zaluzhny. And this has been a little bit of everywhere, just these rumors, but not much confirmed. And with officials, are you going to really see it confirmed? But it's been sort of leaked through on the grapevine. Well, today there's many reports stating that Zaluzhny has been dismissed. He's been fired and is set to be replaced by Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, Kirilo Budanov, of course, in charge of the GUR. Now, in a post on Telegram, the Ministry of Defense has said, "Dear journalists, we immediately answer everyone, no, it's not true," saying that no, that Zaluzhny has not been fired. So far, nothing is confirmed. But I think likely the outcome of where this is going to end with these rumors, because of course, remember that all of this, whether it's propaganda, rumors, whatever, there's always a hint of truth somewhere. I think likely the outcome will be that Zaluzhny is asked to resign, and of course, then we'll see the opposing side, being the pro-Russia or the Russian side, will always fan the flames on this. And this is exactly what both sides will do when there's something like this. They'll fan the flames and make it seem more than it is. That's just part of the informational warfare space that goes on in this war. And like I always speak about, there's two wars. There's the front line, that's unbelievably important, but even more important, I guess, overall from support from the global world, is the informational space around this war. Now, we're going to have a little bit of a look at some interesting footage, and I'll talk about some of my experience in this as well. Now, I've dealt with drones a little bit now, both in Ukraine and in Israel. Anyone who was watching my live stuff when we had some drones, very, very scary thing to come across. Now, many ask, why don't you have shotguns? Now, when I was in Afghanistan, there was a threat of drones, nowhere near how it's developed the threat currently, but more like dropping a grenade into the base. So we did have Remington shotguns. Now, we see in this video, this Russian soldier here, and of course you can see where the heavy fighting is, that there is a Ukrainian drone coming in, this double-barreled shotgun, and he engages it with this successfully from here. And you can see, successful strike, you'll see the drone then dropping and down there. So definitely in use case, can be used. That said, I think most of the people who are going, why not shotguns, haven't handled or been around drones. Both your Mavic DJI style drones, of how hard they are to spot in the air. You fly that much up 20 meters, 60 feet, you can't bloody see it. You can barely hear it. And I think mainly what we're seeing with the FPV drones is people have never been exposed to how fast those actually are, and how inaccurate shooting a shotgun actually is with much range. Another shot. Hey. So there's definitely a use case there, but the amount of shotguns you're going to have, the amount of people just on constant lookout, it's definitely not going to be a solution to this as a whole, but so she knows. But absolutely there is, I guess, a use case there, and somewhere where this could be very, very successful is in this piece of footage that we won't watch the full thing of, but this will be on the Telegram. Now, this is a Ukrainian drone, and this is a tower in occupied territory that these Russian soldiers are trying to reinstall the communications on this tower. We can see them both here, that they have climbed up onto here. Now, this is a pretty bad situation. At this point, FPV drones have a very short battery life comparatively. You're really trying to dodge it until this would run out of battery, and you will see it flashing low battery here as they're trying to go around and around to then avoid this drone. But I will say that the drone does end up catching up with them. Something like this, where it is more loitering like that, the use case of something like a shotgun could be more effective. That said, your exploding style rounds we're seeing off like 25 mil, 30 mil cannons anti-drone is going to be more effective, especially not being fired by just a person with a gun. But either way, to actually have something against drones, there's just not that yet. The defense for drones is shit house. Really, you've got electronic warfare, which is working, but limited. You've got like net guns and shotguns. Realistically, is them a fantastic defense? I would not want to go into an area with drones. Well, I'm not comfortable going in an area with drones with those being the only defenses. I'll do it, but it does suck. Now, we have spoken in length that Ukraine's long-standing restrictions have been really the use of Western weapons into Russian territory. And this has largely been upheld. There's only been a few minor exemptions. Really, we saw the incursions by the independent Russian legions, the RDK, the RU, whatever it is, into Belgrade mainly, but some areas up in sort of the northeast of the country. And what we really saw was limited. We saw some MRAPs and some Humvees cross, and and use of both Czech and American weapons systems as well. Now, Ukrainian defense officially distanced themselves from these incursions. Now, this is for a few reasons. Firstly, the political will of some of the members and commanders in charge of these units was interesting, and of course, due to these restrictions. But I think then there was a sort of a 4D layout that comes under this, that Ukraine was definitely keeping a keen eye on how if there was backlash from this of these vehicles and weapons being used. So we'll just cross an old Humvee and an old MRAP and maybe an M16, M4, SCAR, whatever. We'll cross that across, see if there's any backlash, and we'll test the waters to see where it's going. I've spoken very similar about the nuclear submarines in Australia. I think are very similar on this, on a different scale, but for nuclear power here. Let's see how the public respond to this, and then we'll push on from there. Wanting to use more Western weapons inside of Russia, especially if you can distance yourself saying, well, this is an independent legion with nothing to do with us. But the US State Department at the time said the United States does not encourage or enable attacks inside of Russia. We have been clear about how we don't support the use of US-made equipment being used for attacks inside of Russia, including with the Ukrainians over the past week. And now this is from those legions, of course. In part of that legions, they were saying, well, there's no Ukrainians here. They're Westerners and Russians only. I've got some differing information on that sent to me from that, but at the moment it's just all speculation. And this was 6 to 8 months ago, and we haven't really seen much since then. And Ukraine's response to the US's response was the legion who crossed and recaptured these Western trophies taken by Russia. So the MRAP and the Humvee, we saw what Ukraine was claiming is, no, they didn't cross with those. They weren't the legions. Russia had those as trophies in Russia. The legion went in, got them, and stole them back. That's why there's photographs with these, although there's no evidence being given of this. Now, Ukraine does have sovereign domestic capability of drones and missiles and has proven to be effective, but nowhere near as effective when you compare it to something like your HIMARS, Storm Shadow, Patriots. These are just incomparable. It's apples and oranges. And with these advanced systems we speak of, these can't be used outside of Ukraine's borders, within Ukraine and occupied territories only. And of course, this greatly limits Ukraine's effectiveness in the war, and it does increase Russia's freedom of movement. So let's just have a look on the maps here. That Ukraine can use it in this territory here, but can't use it all the way down here, even in Belarus. That'd be a whole nother story. But this is really where these are limited to and have proven to be affected within this. And I see this as the main issue with the F-16's ability to both conduct the suppression of air defense and then taking out air defense, that the air defense has a hell of a long range and eventually may just be located in Russian territory, which, yes, Ukraine does have some domestic capability to counter that, but not the same as planes, missiles, or systems like this. I think it is just nerfing that system. And of course, Ukrainian generals and high-ranking officials and just people in general believe this is nerfing those as well. And we're going to talk about the reasons for this. But Vice Admiral Oleksiy Nazpapa of the Ukrainian Navy has spoken to Sky News yesterday, suggesting the sooner Ukraine had permission to use systems inside Russia, the sooner that Ukraine would win. So let's have then a quick look over this. It is this one right here. So, asked whether he believed Ukraine could win faster if given such permission, he said, of course, the sooner the armed forces have the necessary battle capabilities and certain capabilities to destroy the enemy's infrastructure facilities, the sooner we will win. Remember that realistically, much behind the line, that out into Russia is fairly safe. And I'll say fairly because we've seen drone strikes, some other missiles, some, of course, high bit of people actually going in, whether they are intelligence agents, whether they're people working in the interest of Ukraine, taking out even bombers. We're seeing that, but it is very few and far between. We're actually seeing a lot less partisan actions there as well, compared to if we did see that Scalp, Storm Shadow, whatever, could actually cross into Russia to get those facilities. He added, as a military man, I will say the following. The enemy, knowing the battle capabilities of our armed forces, reacts accordingly to our actions. Therefore, of course, if we had limitless capabilities, believe me, the war would have played out totally differently. And this would force Russia to move a lot of their equipment back out of the danger zone. Anyway, if Ukraine had certain types of long-range weapons which can be used deeper at the enemy territory, of course, the enemy would have behaved differently, including on the battlefield, and Russia would have to act differently. Putin behaves like a small-scale gangster who knows that if he's matched blow for blow, he will not start a fight. If he understands that Ukraine can fight back and make him really feel pain, of course, he will give all this up. This is all. And you'll see a lot of people will claim that Putin is a gangster. I wouldn't say that he's a small-time gangster, especially with the control of the oligarchs and Russia. But it is true that if Ukraine can put the hurt back onto Russia, how will then this war pan out from there? But it could go one or one other way. So what I'll speak about is why don't we see any shift on this? We see Ukraine really pushing for weapon systems. We see the West, depending on the political party, but the West trying to push weapon systems into Ukraine. But we don't see any shift on the restrictions of these weapons then crossing out into Russia. And I think this is for a few reasons, but I think primarily it's due to Russia's nuclear capability and escalation. Now, people will doubt the effectiveness of the Russian ICBMs and nuclear capability, as we have seen a lot of Russia's other equipment underperform. That said, that is a very big bet to hedge, and Russia know it. Russia know that their last line of defense and last line of offensive action is these nuclear weapons. So if anything is to be up to scratch to work, it is that. And just the amount that Russia have, that even if 99% are ineffective, that's still enough to go. And that's what I'm saying. It's a big bet to hedge, to have no real evidence and say, well, no, none of them will even be able to fire, therefore we shouldn't. I think that is where the main concern actually is of doing this, as we see that Russia has first strike. If there is a threat to the Russian Federation, they will then strike. And I believe if there wasn't this threat, we would have seen very different actions by NATO, troops on the ground, weapon systems going in, rather than this sort of feeling approach. But I do think then there's another issue here. And I think it's a concern around Ukraine's targeting and a potential slippery slope of this targeting. What does strike for strike actually mean? Does it eventually mean then hitting Moscow with these advanced systems? Does it mean if a Russian missile goes into a residential building, then one goes into a residential building somewhere else? I've seen people claim that this would be only fair, this eye for an eye. Of course, I disagree with that vehemently when we're talking about civilians. But how does this continue? How does that escalation take place? If it is eye for an eye strikes, and where does this actually go? Who's controlling what is target, what is not? I think there is still a concern around the targeting as well, if those very long range weapon systems were given in. And does that continual escalation then eventually lead to a nuclear exchange? And this is a bet that I see the West isn't willing to make. Otherwise, they would have given these permissions to, as the Admiral said, that would win the war faster. And I can guarantee that the UK, the US, Australian intelligence agencies have a better intelligence on this than us sitting on Twitter. So I think that's, that complex issue of why those strikes are in. Maybe we will see this in the future. But we are unsure at this point in time. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has visited Washington, meeting in the Pentagon with Secretary of Defense Lloyd J. Austin III to persuade US legislators to approve the $61 billion aid package for Ukraine that is being stalled in Congress at the moment. And this has been stalled since late October 2023. It's been a bloody long time. And Stoltenberg has said NATO allies are providing unprecedented support to Ukraine, and it's important that we continue to do so. Our support is not charity. It's an investment in our own security, because the world will become more dangerous if Russian President Vladimir Putin wins in Ukraine. This is also closely watched in China. So that makes it even more important that we continue to support Ukraine. I think there's a few important bits in here. Of course, China is watching to see exactly how the West respond to a war moving in land grabbing, to see how it will go with Taiwan. We absolutely know this, and we'll say that it is investment. And this is what we're seeing more and more of these leaders or officials push. We see Biden push it. We see Stoltenberg push it. We'll see Sunak push it as well. That if we let Russia win, the next thing we will see, or if we don't arm Ukraine, we will then see NATO fighters, soldiers, then fighting Russia. That the investment now is far cheaper than waiting and fighting Russia somewhere down the track. Now, that is a point that can be argued, but it is what people like Stoltenberg, Biden, Sunak, and many leaders around the world are saying, trying to rally up more support for that money now, going, if we don't do it now, it's going to be 10 times more expensive down the line. And a war with Russia would be far more expensive somewhere else. But there is this idea that they can be beaten, pushed back in Ukraine, and it then is an investment in the future. That is what the officials are saying at the moment. But it is, of course, being held up in Congress with border bloody measures at the moment. But we will see, or we're getting told that we're going to see some movement on that as early as next week. Now, later that day, Stoltenberg then met with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And we're going to have a look over what has been said here. So Stoltenberg, in his opening address, has said this: "I'm confident that all NATO allies will continue to deliver, because supporting Ukraine is not charity. It is an investment in our own security. President Putin started this war, and he could end it today if he stopped attacking a neighbor. So if Russia pulled out, they would end the war. This war could also end if Ukraine stopped defending itself. But that would not mean peace. It would mean Russian occupation. And occupation is not peace. A just peace will require Putin to realize that he will not get what he wants on the battlefield. Moscow must accept a negotiated solution where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation." Now, in this, accept a negotiated solution, we also, for that to happen, we need to see Ukraine push back territory and not have, like he says, give Putin the idea that he can win. With the amount of ground we're seeing taken, I can see why Russia believed that at this point in time they will win the war militarily. And this is what then Blinken came back with. The fact that our allies and partners have actually provided more than the US as much as we've done already. Maybe more combined, but definitely not more as a sole country. The US has done more than any other country, almost more than every other one combined. This should reinforce the message to Congress as it's considering the supplemental budget request, trying to push that then across the line. But equally, if the United States doesn't follow through on our commitments, then it's going to make it more difficult to have Europeans and others continue to do what they've already been doing. So saying that if the US doesn't uphold and push money through to Ukraine, then Europeans, other nations are going to have to fill that gap somewhere. And of course, it's going to make it even more difficult. And if one country like bloody Domino's pulls out, we may see others pull out in that as well. But I'm also confident that in Congress, we continue to have a strong and bipartisan support for Ukraine. So let's see in the days and weeks ahead as this moves forward. There is no other magic pot of money. We are now currently out of military assistance that we've been providing to Ukraine. And we're even seeing some evidence of what that means on the battlefield. Of course, we hear a lot of Ukrainians speak about shell hunger, artillery, and the lack of funding going down onto the front line. So of course now we're going to move across into the maps, probably the part that you are only here for. So of course we have Ukraine in the center, the capital of Kyiv, Russia, and here of course this is Belarus, the red areas occupied since the 24th of Feb, or the 24th of Feb invasion of course has moved back and forward, and the purple from back in 2014. So there has been some talk about some changes down near here in Krinky not being shown on the map. But the main area that is of interest today is that the Russian Defense Ministry has said that its forces have taken control of the village of Tabaivka in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. So let's have a look at exactly then where this is. So of course, this is the Sinkivka front we speak of, and this Tabaivka in here. Now, Ukraine has denied this, that Vladimir Fito, the head of communications for Ukraine's ground forces, said regarding the information that Russia would have already captured Tabaivka, this is not true. Battles are currently taking place in Tabaivka. Our defenders are trying to dislodge them from the positions where they have temporarily found themselves. So to me, this sounds like Russia has actually taken the position and Ukraine is trying to push them out. And I actually think the deep state map shows this. So let's step back to when we last spoke, somewhere on the 28th. We see that Russia pushed up through into Tabaivka here, looking like that it is occupied. And then we've seen then this pushback, as he says, to try and dislodge the Russian forces in here. Now, I have no doubt there is very heavy fighting going on here, but it does seem to show that it was taken and then there. Now, let's have a look on some other maps and some footage and have a look at why this is then important. Now, Tabaivka number 1. This was earlier in the day from Suryak. Clashes between the Russian army continue at the western hills of Tabaivka. There is not true about the recapturing of the village by Ukrainian forces. However, Tabaivka won't be fully secured until the capture of the hills. I'll show you the hills in a second. On the other hand, Russian troops advance southwest of Krokhalmy in the direction of Pishani, which should be the next objective of this local offensive. So continuing that push on from Krokhalmy here to Pishani to try and gather this area here, but saying that it's not captured until the hills are captured. And let's have a look at where these hills are. This is Tabaivka. It sits down in this valley and there's hills on the western side. You'll get a better idea then on this map. So this is Tabaivka here. Now this doesn't show the hills to the extent of it, but you can see that it sits down in, and that Suryak is saying that Russia has actually gained foothold on the other side of these hills, not what Deep State is showing or that Ukraine is saying either, but that is interesting there. Now, let's get rid of this one. Then later on in the day, Suryak said this. Today, Russian army secured Tabaivka after a capture of the western hills. In addition, troops made new advances toward Berestove. No map change took place in the axis of this here, so out to the south. But it said that it has captured up to those hills. So somewhere out into these hills here. Let's see if we can actually just line up where Suryak is saying. Now, we're going to wait for some confirmed stuff to come through, but see these paddocks here that it is saying. You can see this paddock here. So it's saying something like this. And of course, this is the valley running through here, and these are the high spot in the hills. And now when I say high spot in the hills, these aren't mountains. This is just the higher ground. But anywhere where it's so flat, any higher ground is very, very liked by ground forces, especially when you're talking armoured movements and any movements that are running through there. But it is interesting to see where this will then unfold. Now, we're going to work maybe a little bit backwards, but stay with me. Now, Sinkivka, this is where we looked on the map last time and said that there was a Ukrainian tank firing on Russian positions right in around here. And we have seen since that day, the 28th, there we have seen this push up, that it has corrected that there are Russian positions right up near Sinkivka, and they are advancing on this northeastern front of the country. Now, we're going to look down. We haven't seen anything around Orokhiv, in Robitny here as well. You can see no movement on the map, but this is where we haven't seen movement for a long time. In this Proteni area, this is Zavetny Orozhany front. Now, this is where Ukraine had its most success in its counter-offensive. Now, let's have a look at what Suryak says then about this situation. Southwest Donetsk Zap front, Russian army made new advance in the forest area of Proteni. This forest has been the area of clashes since the summer of 23, as Russian troops wanted to expand the buffer zone around Proteni and moving the front line to the lakes for better defense. Now, you know me, I like when maps line up, and look at this. From last time we spoke to now, Russia, it does show, lining up with Suryak, that there has been an advancement in here. So we know that that has 100% occurred. We know maps have, they lean one way, lean the other, but when they both agree, good shit. Anyway, Novomalyivka. We did say the other day, Surek had reported that Russia had made some ground in here. Now, this hadn't been shown on the map, so we were like, has it not? Now, let's have a look here. From the 28th, we do see that this move up near Novomalyivka in here. We know this is an important area for the roads and supply routes, both up through Marinka, Pobeda, but also down into Ugledar, where Russia has really tried to push and push and push for 12 months and hasn't made any ground. They're now trying to more swamp in and actually cut off the supply lines rather than just throwing men at it. Who would have thought you do something rather than just throw men at something? But this is where this new advancement then lines up again. Situated southwest Donetsk, Russian army managed to re-enter the stronghold and expanded control over new tree belts west and southwest of these positions. So exactly where we are talking about. You know me, I like when things then line up. Now, we haven't seen really any movement up through this area here. There is some people saying that Ukraine has got some position back from its 2014 border to the north of Marinka, but I haven't seen any map but one, which is pretty biased, saying about this. Now, Avdiivka, this is where, well, people will say this is where the main Russian effort is. Some will say the main Russian effort is actually in the northeast. And we need to listen to that because we're seeing a lot of ground and a lot of forces push into there. But let's have a look. So Russia has made some ground. Ukraine's lost some ground to the west of Pisky down here. Of course, on this road leading into Pervomaysky, another important area. And then Russia has made some more ground and expanding control up through Opitny and towards the center of Avdiivka on multiple fronts, really 3 fronts here. Of course, expanding grey zone in the north, expanding red in both the south and then on the east. And this is a dangerous area for what is then happening. And like me, we like when things then line up, and this lines up. Russian army took control of the last positions south of the forest at the eastern outskirts of the city. Moreover, troops advanced southeast of Opitny until the section of the M30 road. Ukrainian army counterattack towards this complex was repelled by Russian forces. Now, I can't talk whether that was repelled or not, but it is showing that some ground was made up in here, and these maps are showing similar. Well, see where this road starts to curve up, and similar, maybe slightly different areas, but I think close enough to say that there was an advance somewhere down around there. Now, that is, I believe, all the updates that I have for you guys today. So, look, speed run this one. If you'd like to support me, there's links down below. If you want to get some merch, there's some Willie's Wanker Group merch. But otherwise, legends, look after yourself. Have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you for Hump Day tomorrow. Almost through the working week. Thanks, guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.